Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming, Elden Ring in a new tier list video. We're here, we're at Elden Ring Incantations, which for the last two patches has been the tier list that I've made for that current patch, 1.06, 1.07. Every time that I make this video, the next patch just drops basically the next week. Maybe the tradition will continue, we'll have to see. It seems to be roughly every 8 to 9 weeks we get a new major patch. So 1.09 must be around the corner because we're making this video. So here is the tier list. We have S, A, B, C, and D. If it is on the list, then it is a very good incantation and it serves an important purpose, but the ones that down in D, they are kind of more niche. So with that said, let's begin the list, starting from the bottom at D. First up then, we have Howl of Shabriri, which has that specific purpose, plus 25% damage globally, and in the previous patch they even extended the duration of the effect that increases tech power and lowers defensive power. It's basically a big buff to make yourself really vulnerable but deal a lot more damage when you've got it on. It doesn't see much use in either style of content because you are so much exposed when you use this, especially in PvP where it's really bad, but in madness builds and other buff based builds it serves a purpose there. Then on the other hand we have Fire's Deadly Sin, which I keep down in a D tier despite the fact that some people were saying that it does have some real purpose. We even have a build where we're using fire and frost together, and that's kind of the main purpose of this special ability. You hurt yourself over time, causing fire damage to those near you, and then that can cleanse the frost status, which then allows another frost status prop and allows for high DPS. So basically it has a good purpose in very specific frost popping builds, and there it is obviously very good, and that's why it's on the list, but it's not as broken or crazy as it once was in the previous patches where it was just kind of silly and more of an exploit. Moving up to C tier then, we're going to have a new one that wasn't on the list before that probably should have been. It's of course the Discus of Light. This is a very simple incantation, is it not? Throw a little ring of light at your target at medium to close range, dealing reasonable damage, and it also comes back to you like a boomerang. That has some very important utility with, say, carrying retaliation, the Ash of War on a shield to get yourself some magic swords, which is awesome. It also works with their great shield, which will shoot that blast of light when you parry at the right time, so it has some interesting synergy with certain ashes or shields. On its own, it's just a nice kind of harassment. It's also quite cheap. In 1.07 it was made cheaper on the FP and stamina consumption. They even increased the range, the speed and duration of the halo, which is really good. Further, most important, it's even faster with the casting speed. So it's definitely relevant, definitely worthy of being on the list, but I also don't think it's insane. On its own, it's just kind of nice, it's fine. But if I was going to use one single target incantation, there are better options on this list, but it does have that important synergy with certain builds, so definitely worthy of the C tier in my opinion. Next we have the Unendurable Frenzy. You're walking forward and channeling this frenzy fire everywhere, and that can be pretty damn good in PvP, especially with, say, free-for-all in mind or team deathmatch or invasions. But Frenzy was heavily nerfed, so I can't really rate Frenzy anything too highly because it is in kind of an awkward state. I hope that it is addressed in some way in a future patch, maybe 1.09. For now though, this is a strong and useful incantation, especially in a Frenzy build, but I don't want to rate it higher than a C still. Next then for C tier is another frenzied option, the Frenzied Burst, which is essentially a snipe ability, which is really cool with the swirling nature of it, the really long range, the damage, the knockdown. I still really like this ability, but it is still nowhere near as strong as it once was, but it undeniably has a purpose, a utility. I can't put it higher than a C because it's fallen from its once very high place, and with no changes, I keep it where it was. Also in C tier then is a weapon buff, the Black Flame buff. The Black Flame blade here will buff up your weapon with Black Flame, causing it to deal Black Flame damage on swing, but it will also enhance your Ashes of War, even making ranged roars and attacks deal black fire damage at range, which is really cool and really effective. The downside of this incantation specifically though is how short it actually lasts. The cast time is really short, that helps with that, but it's undeniably annoying how often you have to rebuff to keep this effect going. I would love to see a duration buff improvement to this incantation specifically. I think it would make a major difference for it. Also in C, because it has obvious great utility, is the Law of Regression. It just strips players of their buffs. It's also law relevant and cool, and serves a very important function in today's PvP and since it started, so I keep it at a C. Lastly in C is Placidusec's Ruin, which is in a weird place right now. Technically, this is better this patch. Getting a long cast off like this that takes a while to channel, dealing a lot of damage, hitting a wide area, that's great in free-for-all or team deathmatch where you're able to get that cast off. So in PvP, in those modes, it's definitely definitely more relevant than it used to be. But it's still very awkward with major weaknesses, being able to be knocked out of it, leaving yourself exposed. As I've talked about before, I think some small adjustments to this to give it more hyper armor or allow you to cancel out of it, maybe a bit of control over how you channel it. Mechanical changes to this one would make a major difference and actually make it a lot more relevant in the content. Waiting on that, I keep it at a C grade. But now we move up to the B tier, and we're going to begin with one that's actually down from A, just contextually, it's Pest Threads. There's not much to say about this. Pest Threads is a useful incantation where you can absolutely blast people with these threads. Its tracking is great, the damage is good, but I just think it's a bit overrated for me to put it at A tier compared to the other things we're talking about in this list. It's definitely a worthy and strong incantation, but perhaps it doesn't stand up to, say, some of the A tier options or certainly the S tier options, so contextually I figured maybe it's fairer for it to be in B. Staying in B tier from last patch is the Stone of Garang, which I thought was fantastic since patch 1.07, where they actually reduced the stamina consumption of this. They even improved its attack power, which is very notable in PvE. It's also extended the impact area of the projectile, so it's easier to land in PvP and certainly in PvE where, you know, it's not hard to land it in general. We put it in B tier because it's actually really good for the poise damage it does, as well as the bigger oomph it has on impact. You can also spam it because of the cheaper stamina cost. It's a very fun and simple incantation that deserves to be better than it once was, and this buff really helped that. However, its output isn't anything nutty. If you stand there throwing these rocks, you're not going to do nearly as much damage as some of the other incantations we're going to talk about, and it's still a lot slower than certain, say, Ashes of War you could use for the same purpose. So B tier still feels fair to me. Next in B tier, also staying there, is the Black Blade, which was put in B tier since patch 1.07, where they reduced the stamina consumption on it. They gave it better turning performance, and most importantly, you can actually hit with the sword itself at melee range. Well, they also made some smaller nerfs to it specifically to manage it not being broken based on those buffs. So it's much more viable this patch, but compared to the Destined Death Weapon Ashes, I still think it's the worst option of all three due to the performance and output and in general applying Destined Death. Still, it is a good incantation, certainly worthy using for that Destined Death effect. Another incantation that I had in B tier last time and I keep there is just a basic heal. You could even just say heal in general, better heals, worse heals, just cheap heals. The reason is because this is so useful to keep you alive in an early playthrough or general gameplay, but there are specific enemies that are weak to healing effects. This is of course the Revenants. It hard stuns them, it does a ridiculous amount of damage, it lets you get a free critical, and therefore I think if you have any faith and you can run incantations, this should be in your list. It's vital. So yeah, keeping it B tier for that reason. Alright, so this one was a tough one for me. Do I keep this in B or bring it up to an A? There's two dragon transformations that we're going to talk about here. Firstly, we're going to talk about Dragon Claw, which is a high damage, hyper armor, infinite combo possible incantation, because if you use two seals, one in either hand, and then you cast on your right, cast on your left, you can just keep slamming. Or you can just do the normal combo, which is just a multi-hit combo, which does have some delay after you use it. In 1.07, the Claw was improved. It's cheaper on the FP, you got better control over it, and they've even improved the stamina or attack power against guarding enemies, so it's slightly better. We've done some builds with this and found that it's quite fun and effective, but it also has limited potential because you can be interrupted when using it, and you do limit yourself very much when you basically rely on this incantation as your only form of damage. So I think it's fair to keep that one in a B. Dragon Maw, on the other hand, I think also deserves to be a high B. They also reduced the FP consumption on this in the same patch of 1.07. They improved the hitbox at close range, so it's easier to hit with it, and again, better against guarding enemies. It deals a nice burst of damage, but it is very slow. But compared to the other dragon transformations, which contextually are better this patch, I think B tier is where these two probably still deserve to be. But you guys let me know as we begin to talk about A tier and the A tier dragon transformations. Now, I actually think we're going to separate these a little bit. So we have the magic dragon transformations in general, whether that's the weaker one or the stronger one. We have the fire and we have the ice. It's an interesting combination because you can really buff these up, and people were saying they think these should be rated higher than a B because their output potential is very high, especially with specific builds. There are talismans to help deal more damage when you're charging with something like this, talismans to improve the element damage that you're using, whether it's magic or fire, and even buffs like Terra Magica, the seal on the ground for magic, or of course Flame Grant Me Strength to improve fire damage. They definitely are stronger this patch. In 1.08 we have the arena with free-for-all and team deathmatch, and in that scenario where you have the time to channel these, the range, the AoE, the wide-reaching attack, the damage they deal, it's absolutely insane in that environment. So contextually, they're better this patch because of that, and that is probably what pushes them over into A tier for me. Also in A tier for the same reasons as last time is the Scarlet Rot version, which over time has become weaker. It doesn't build Scarlet Rot as much because they've nerfed the whole status build-up thing, but it's still an incredibly effective way to apply Scarlet Rot and then just forget about it. It's also really annoying to deal with just for the raw damage, so you can get the Scarlet Rot and then just keep using it, say in the arena, where it's stronger as well. So in general, Dragon Breath attacks are amazing this patch, especially in PvP where that's relevant. However, I actually keep the Magma one specifically down in B. It's a lot easier to avoid that. The Magma's a smaller area than say the Breast covering a wider channel, and I just think it's weaker than the others because of that. Unlike Greyl's Roar, which can be absolutely insane. The debuff aspect of it, great. The knockback poise aspect, which is super important in the poise patch of 1.08, and of course the damage it can do. The other ones require a bit of build making. This one is just a powerful roar, so improve roars a bit, go for it. Good in all content, just a bit slow to cast because it's very powerful, probably keeping it from an S tier because of that. Another incantation we brought up to A from B though is Black Flame. This is something you can get pretty damn early in a playthrough, and it works incredibly effectively, especially in PvE against bosses where you're dealing that Black Flame damage, the percent health damage. With a low faith build or early game, you can do absolute work with this thing. But people were saying that honestly they believe it deserves to be an A. It's hard carried a lot of people through their playthroughs. They picked it up, they used it early game, it's amazing, got them through the mid game, got them through the end game. I can agree that it's a long-term incredible incantation to get the Blackfire effect in a really efficient and even ranged way. So understandably people swear by this incantation and wanted to see it in A tier. And after reflection, I agree. So that's why it's up now. Also in A tier then, compared to the other weapon buff we talked about before, Blood Flame Blade, which is amazing. In the same way that Black Flame Blade will buff up your weapon and then you can do ranged versions of Black Flame with Ashes of War, Blood Flame works the same. I don't know if you know this, but Bleed's pretty strong in Elden Ring. In fact, it's kind of brokenly strong in both PvE and PvP where relevant, and by simply using this incantation on your weapon, suddenly you're dealing way more bleed damage and fire damage, which is insanely good in many areas of PvE. Further, it will augment your Ashes of War, turning ranged Ashes of War into a ranged bleed buildup, which is just ludicrous. I've used this in so many different builds. It's so effective and so fun to use. Also, it looks super cool. So compared to the other shorter, weaker version of the Black Flame Blade, where there's better ways to get Blackfire buff, like the Black Flame incantation, this one is just insane. One of the strongest, if not the strongest weapon buff in the game, in my opinion. Another one that I keep in A tier that I really like is the Swarm of Flies. This thing finds its way into every damn arcane build I ever do that's considering PvP because it's just so effective there. Even though it's been nerfed a little bit to be a bit slower and less effective, if you're running high arcane in various builds, this thing can pop a bleed in PvP on its first initial contact when you've got 80 arcane, and that is insane. If you've got really low arcane, just enough to use it at 16, it still works as a slow moving projectile that's distracting and annoying, building up some blood status. You can time that by rushing someone as it's about to hit them. They roll either the swarm or you and take the other one. So it makes for an incredibly useful utility any build that runs even a bit of arcane. It's also useful in PvE where enemies will just stand in it and let the bleed build up just go. So it's an incredible incantation despite the nerfs, but that keeps it from S tier as well. Speaking of S tier, we have an incantation that is down from S tier. Bestial Sling, which has been the victim of target nerfs pretty much every patch for 3 in a row, I believe. They have massively reduced the poise damage that you can deal with this incantation specifically, and in fact they've targeted just poise on it multiple times. Further, they've also reduced the max range, that there was kind of a bug you could manipulate to get further range on the shotgun blaster pellets, and it's just not what it once was. However, it's still very useful for chip damage, comes out quick, you can combo it really well. It's still a really good incantation, and it leads to chain casting, which is very important. But it's undeniable, it's not quite what it once was. It's not necessarily S tier anymore. I think it has to come down from S tier, finally. There's 2 more lightning-based incantations to talk about for A tier though. First up we have Home Bolt, which will blast an enemy, and then you can combo it into further hits which come out much quicker. It's not the heaviest hitting incantation, but it comes out so quick when you use chain casting. Blast targets in PvE over and over and over, building up good DPS. It's just a really efficient and effective incantation for what it's supposed to do. So I just keep it at an A tier for that reason. Lightning Spear is just an old, reliable, classic classic incantation from the Soul series. It's got range, you can tap it or charge it, which can make it stronger, super viable in both sides of the game. In 1.07, they even improved the attack power of this one, so it's just better. And because it's lightning, you can get some serious AoE damage in any area that's got water, such as the lakes. It's a fantastic incantation and one you often see in builds and in PvP. The old reliable classic, and so A tier is where it belongs. The last incantation for A tier, which is sadly going to overfill it now awkwardly, Flame. A longer cast time to its weaker version Catch Flame, and it deals more damage, obviously, but it takes longer to use, so it's relevant in the content, is weaker, say, in PvP, because you need the fast cast most of all. You're not necessarily looking for the biggest hit, you're looking for it to hit. However, in PvE, it's obviously a better option where things are a lot more predictable, and you can get that shotgun blast off for big damage and fire damage at that. It's S tier, though, where its other version, Catch Flame, deserves to be. It is one of the chain casting options in the game, where you jump and use it, and then do a chain cast with something like Home Bolt to get animations out quicker. It's also really effective and efficient at getting fire damage on those that are weak to it. It might not deal as much damage as Flame, but it serves the same purpose and it's faster and more efficient at it, as well as being cheaper, and it remains very strong for that reason. Now we can blast through the last S tier options. Giantsflame. Take the pretty much the optimal best incantation for damage that we have, and the fact that it's fire, the fact that you can channel and charge it up. There's so many ways to buff this one, and in 1.08, when you're in the arena, its AoE capabilities really shine, because in free-for-all you can blast multiple targets that are dueling. In team deathmatch you can help your team by blasting multiple targets in general. You can channel and build it up off screen, and even in direct duels it's just so goddamn effective. PvE wise, it's a monster. If anything's weak to fire, it will just destroy them. It does some of the best damage out of any incantation in the game. It's fantastic. S tier, obviously. We do have something new in S tier though. Ancient Dragon Lightning here. I'm bringing it up to an S tier from an A tier after valid talks about it in the comments of last time. In 1.08, you might start seeing this in arena, in the free-for-all and so on, because it's a big AoE and deals nice damage. However, it's quite avoidable if you're paying attention to it, which is the weakness and issue with this one. Also, it leaves you a bit exposed when using it. However, we bring it up to S tier because of what you guys were talking about. The PvE side of this incantation is crazy. It is an absolute boss burning machine. It is ludicrously strong at that aspect. For PvE boss burn and DPS, it's one of the strongest options in the entire game. And so it deserves to be S tier, because if it's the strongest or one of the strongest at an aspect of the game, then yeah, it's S tier. And technically, it's relevant more in this patch because of free-for-all and so on. So, as it deserved to be, it is now S tier. Lastly, for our S tier, a really quick mention as we know them. Our two self-buffs, Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow, improving the damage that you deal, improving the fire affinity with Flame Grant Me Strength, which buffs up fire incantations we've talked about, as well as many other weapons and damage types. And then Golden Vow not just improves your damage, but also gives you some defense, which is incredible in all content. And the thing is, you don't have to use one or the other, you can stack them and use both, which is broken and pretty much used in every damn build that I've ever seen and I've ever used at these later stages of Elden Ring. Undeniably S tier, because what they do is so impactful and important, and everyone basically uses them. But there you have it. We have our complete tier list now. I've just ordered things strongest left and weakest to the right in each individual tier, although it's like splitting hairs, to be honest. But a big thank you to you guys in the comments from last time, getting involved, discussing the incantations, helping me more accurately place these things. If there's anything you would change about this tier list, or maybe an incantation that deserves to even be on the list that isn't, then let me know in the comments of this video. We shall see if patch 1.09 shows up now I've made this video, but we'll have to wait and see. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thank you for watching, we'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.